Hello and welcome. Today we are covering the final song in kind of the Encanto movie proper, All of You. So let's go ahead and dive on in, kind of see how this piece is structured. It's pretty interesting because we have all these different characters and all these different kind of story arcs to wrap up. So let's see how Lin-Manuel Miranda did it. I'm Dr. Zach. Grab a cup of tea and join me. All right, so labeling this piece was very challenging, right? Let's just kind of go through and see like how we can what we can call each of these sections. I put in parentheses anywhere where Genius Lyrics and I disagree, and we'll be kind of talking about why I disagree with what they have to say. Verse 1, we have, Mirabelle singing. This one kind of makes sense that we call this a verse. And before this, we actually do get an instrumental little introduction, which is kind of interesting because the only other time we get that is in Dos Oruguitas. There is one, if you are watching the movie, in front of the song We Don't Talk About Bruno, but in the soundtrack, it isn't there for the Bruno song. So this is kind of unique in the sense that we have that instrumental intro. Maybe it's like trying to call, towards like the families working together now, and the Dos Oruguitas song was about the grandmother, right? Abuela. So now that, Abuela is kind of more in sync with everybody, that we get this kind of instrumental introduction. One possible reason. Okay, so then we have this part that says, but the stars don't shine, they burn, and the constellations shift, etc., etc. And Genius counted that as verse 1. And I think they even had it all kind of smushed together. I'll put the link in the description for those lyrics. I really think this is kind of like a pre-chorus. Now, you may have already kind of looked ahead and seen that I have Abuela's chorus here. That's because each of these choruses are kind of a little bit different. That's what I'm calling a chorus. Basically, anytime that we have all of you, I'm saying that's a chorus. That's something that we keep coming back to, similar to a chorus. Also, having like a verse 1, a pre-chorus, and then chorus, that'd be like a pretty typical progression for a song, right? The chorus changes depending on who's singing it. So I added another word to this chorus. This is Abuela's chorus. Okay, cool. We got pre-chorus into chorus and then an interlude. Again, this kind of makes sense, right? We've set up the first few parts of our song and now we get an interlude. So then now the verses are all going to be different because Genius thought that Abuela's chorus was verse 2. So then we get verse 2 with Bruno and his lines, and then we get verse 3 right after that, and then we have interlude 2. So if you notice, interlude is what Genius Lyrics called that first part where they're talking about, oh, we're going to talk about Bruno now. And I actually added the 1. Genius Lyrics just says interlude, and I think interlude came back a little bit later, and I wanted to number them so I knew which interlude I was kind of talking about or thinking about when I was analyzing this piece. So we get interlude 2, which Genius called a bridge, but I think like this is serving that same kind of purpose as the Bruno, right? We had our first few parts of the song, then we get an interlude, so then we can get to verse 2 and 3, and now we have an interlude that's going to actually take us to the bridge, okay? It's like almost like a pre-bridge kind of function. We're getting out of all of the verses that are, have the individual family members kind of singing, and now we're getting into the townspeople. So I think like the bridge actually starts here with the townspeople, because this is something that's pretty different from what we've heard before, right? Before we've had kind of mostly solo singers going through, and now we get like a whole chorus of singers. Not to be confused with the chorus of the song. So we have the bridge here, I think. And again, Genius Lyrics just called this another verse. And after that, I have Isabella's chorus, because this is Isabella's melody here. The "It's a dream when we work as a team," right? If you think back to the We Don't Talk About Bruno song, he told me that the man of my dreams would, So that's the same melody. So this chorus belongs to Isabella, and we still get the all of you, right? That's what I'm saying defines the chorus, is the all of you words, right? In the background. So we had Abuela's chorus when she was talking about her kind of closure that she's coming to. We have Isabella's chorus here with her melody. And then we have a verse because the all of you disappears at this point. So this is where if the all of you kept going through, this would be Luisa's verse, right? Or Luisa's chorus here. So we have verse 4 with Luisa, and then we have the pre-chorus again. Now this is where Genius Lyrics really isn't consistent with what they're saying because they called this a bridge. And this actually does kind of sound like a bridge. I see why just kind of listening through, you'd be like, okay, yeah, this sounds more like where the bridge maybe should be. But they didn't label this when it came as like the second thing that we heard in the piece where I said it's a pre-chorus. So then it's like, why was it not a bridge before, but it's a bridge now? That would be my question. So we get the pre-chorus, and this is kind of strange because now we expect somebody's chorus to happen, right? But we don't quite get it. We get this interlude 3 where they're talking to Mariano, and then we get a verse with Dolores, but then Dolores gets her chorus. So I have marked here that she has a chorus kind of after this Dolores, I see you and I hear you. So I wanted to leave the lyrics kind of how I found them online so you can see how I'm breaking them up. So we do kind of get a chorus, right? We have the pre-chorus, which would set up this kind of all of you idea, but then our expectations are diverted. We get a little interlude, another little verse for another character, right? And then we get Dolores's chorus. So it's kind of like taking a little detour to get to the chorus, which I've talked about in other videos, right? Setting up some sort of expectation and then either fulfilling that expectation or denying that expectation. And if we compare it like, we had Isabella's chorus didn't have a pre-chorus. So, I mean, this can just be explained as the composer is trying to create variety, right? The first time, very simple pre-chorus chorus. The second time, no pre-chorus. And then the third time, we have the pre-chorus. It's then we detour around the interlude and verse 5 until we finally get the chorus with the all of yous. Okay, so different techniques, right? Different ways of kind of like mixing this up. So even on repeated listenings, right, it doesn't get too repetitive. I think that's one of the big advantages of doing something like this. Like, yes, you lose out on a bit of consistency over the song, but if people are listening to it over and over again, they're going to remember those different sections. And this makes it so it's not just too repetitive. I mean, pre-chorus, chorus every single time would be like a lot to listen to. But instead, we have these kind of different configurations of it. So then we get to verse 6. And I mentioned we have the verse 1 melody here, okay? So we've had all these different melodies depending on the character. This is very similar to like the We Don't Talk About Bruno song. Like depending on what the character's kind of personality or gift or whatever is, they have a certain way that they sing their verse. So we've come back, we kind of come full circle now. This is the same melody that we started the song with. And in fact, we get that same pre-chorus as well. Now, this is even more inconsistent for what Genius has labeled this because they labeled it as a bridge at this point, but they didn't label it as a bridge before because a bridge coming that early in the song is very strange, right? So I think the bridge label is just kind of out for this section, and I even just thought about labeling it like this is the burn. This is burn, right? This is the burn section, and that's what we can call it. But I was like, well, I think we could stick with some of this terminology and say it's a pre-chorus. So then we have the pre-chorus, which then goes into Mirabelle's chorus, because now we get kind of like the realization of all of this, culminates with Mirabelle saying, I see me, all of me. There it is, all of me, which is what I'm saying is the requirement for a chorus. Yes, we have different characters singing, which means they have different melodies. But one of the things that's consistent through all of this is the all of me. So how do we account for that consistency? Well, what I'm saying is if we have all of me, that means it's a chorus. And depending on who's singing, that it's that character's turn for the chorus. And we have some pretty significant characters singing the chorus. I mean, first time it's Abuela, and then it's Isabella, who then goes into Luisa. Remember, Luisa was a pretty significant character too, But I think maybe the emphasis is on Isabella because like the miracle was supposed to be saved with, Mirabelle hugging Isabella. So like that was like more central to the story. Getting Dolores a chorus is kind of interesting. I think really like it's wrapping up that kind of loose end of what happens about Mr. Mariano, right? Because that was one of the main conflicts of the film. So I think this is kind of like Dolores's time to shine here, and so appropriately, she gets kind of that weight of a full chorus dedicated to this like resolving this tension, this situation. As far as rhyme schemes go, the most prevalent ones are ABAB and AABB. So pretty straightforward stuff. There are some internal rhymes we can look at. Here, I kind of marked where I thought the line ends were. So then, if you follow my markings, it's ABAB, like foundation, celebration, true, and you, right? So you kind of have to like decipher where those line ends are in order to find the rhyme scheme. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Like in Abuela's chorus, right? We have an internal rhyme here, not some magic that you got. The miracle is you, 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 you. So then this sets up the kind of all of you idea and two rhymes with that. So it's kind of like A, B, C, C internal rhymes, and then B, 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 B. Right. So like there's some little deviations like this where yes, it isn't just AABB or ABAB all the time, but like they're pretty apparent what's happening. Like in Bruno's verse, we have your bro loves you so, let it go. So we have a little internal rhyme. So this would be BB internal and then a B end rhyme with upsetting and sweating being our AA. So remember, that's kind of like I'm saying, it's like AABB, but it's not just rhyming all the ends. Like we have a little internal rhyme thrown in there to get a little something extra happening. And then verse 3 is kind of interesting because bro doesn't rhyme with anything, but then we have say okay, and then we have way and day, right? So all of those rhyme. And then we have an internal rhyme here, come into the light, all the triplets reunite. So it's really relying on this say, okay, way, day kind of rhyme, with then a little internal rhyme in the middle and something that is not really rhyming at the end, unless you count this saying, which I think is what is the intention, is that bro is kind of just like a throwaway thing, and we're really trying to rhyme this saying line. Interlude 2, sound, and town has that same vowel sound, right? So like the rhymes are pretty straightforward as far as what's happening. And they stay consistent, like the pre-chorus is just like ABAB, maybe with like a little tag. Like in the last pre-chorus, we have open your eyes, right? Is kind of the little tag to that, so that doesn't rhyme. But otherwise, burn, turn, been, and in, right? Those are your rhymes. What are some conclusions then? Well, in a dense piece like this, where you have so many characters, so many melodies, so many stories that you're trying to wrap up, it's good to have something to kind of latch on to. I think Lin-Manuel Miranda achieved that by having the all of you happen at different moments, right? It wasn't like character, all of you is a separate thing. Character, all of you again as a separate thing. The all of you was kind of like woven into those different, what I labeled as choruses, right? We had Abuela's chorus and Isabella's chorus and Mirabelle's chorus. So we get kind of a 2-for-1 with those. We are learning more about what the character is experiencing while it's serving kind of the function of a chorus. And we also have the piece bookended, right? So it starts the same way that it finishes, with Mirabelle singing and then having that pre-chorus, with the difference being that at the end we get Mirabelle's chorus instead of Abuela's chorus following the pre-chorus. So like I kind of briefly mentioned before, this reminds me a lot of We Don't Talk About Bruno, where the verses don't have the same melody, which is pretty typical. And like I use that evidence to define what a verse was in other songs. But in these big kind of like company songs, right? Where you have all the characters together. It really helps to distinguish the characters by giving them their own melody, bringing back melodies, right? Like Isabella had her melody when Luisa sings. That's calling back to surface pressure. So there's like a lot of callbacks in this piece, using a lot of the motives that have come before. So you can kind of identify which character is singing without having, to have new musical material. So like all of that makes sense. And I think that works as like a verse structure, especially since it's really consistent here. And that's all good and fine. Instrumentation is also used to kind of break up the song. Like when Bruno has his lines, the instrumentation kind of drops out. Also, when we have Dolores and her lines, the instrumentation drops out, and both of those parts have really rapidly spoken words, right? So it's kind of like trading off. Instead of this, like, more flowing melody with a rich accompaniment, we now have these really rapid words and almost no accompaniment. So, like, those two contrast each other, and they're used like in good places to provide some contrast within the piece. So that's something that you can think about, right? Instead of just like having the same instruments go all the way through all the time, what's something you can do to, provide some of that contrast, not just with the, melodies, but with how the melodies are presented. Is it a flowing melody? Is it really rapidly spoken words? How does that change the accompaniment? Like, it's all really well put together here. So then, what about improvement? Well, this song, I don't know how many people actually know this song. Like, you kind of remember, oh yeah, at the end they all kind of like get together and sing Kumbaya and like everything's fine. But like it's not very memorable. And I think part of it is that we don't get really any new musical material. The way that the pre-chorus and chorus, right? There's not really like a solid chorus because each character is singing their own chorus. So it's like doesn't stick with you quite as much as like We Don't Talk About Bruno. That has a really strong chorus that you can latch onto and be like, yes, I know what that is. I know what they're doing. That makes sense. But this one doesn't have that. And that's okay. Like, not every single song has to be a pop hit. And the way that everything's working in this piece is really well like presented and crafted. But with that, I think it's a little strange that we have the accompaniment drop out with Dolores because there's been so many callbacks. Like the Isabella's melody comes back, Luisa's melody comes back, and Dolores did have that kind of like rapid speech in We Don't Talk About Bruno, but it didn't have these like pizzicato elements. And where we did get that was with Isabella's part in We Don't Talk About Bruno, which then did go to Dolores. But when Dolores started singing, like again, the instrumentation opened up, it became fuller. So like that didn't quite work for me. Like the melodic things, the way that the characters were singing and the notes they were singing made a lot of sense, but the instrumentation I thought didn't quite have those same strong connections. Now, like I said, it was important to have a break in the instrumentation there because Dolores is speaking quickly, so it's easier to understand the singer if there's less going on behind them. And like we needed that kind of break similar to how Bruno, right? When Bruno had his lines, there was a bit of a break in the instrumentation. So like I get the purpose, but it would have been neat if like there's a bit more stronger connections with the instrumentals to that like We Don't Talk About Bruno song, which is the most similar to this song because of all the characters that are singing. And then speaking of Bruno, I thought his lines kind of came out of nowhere. Like, it's cool. The lines are cool. I like the lines, but they have nothing to do with his song. And so it's like, well, his song wasn't really like true to who he is and what his whole like deal is about. So maybe like it makes sense to do something completely different. I could see that. But then it's like, why this style? I don't know. I don't know. And there's just like nothing to really latch onto as far as like what should Bruno's music sound like? Is it this kind of fast speech for the purpose of providing a break in the song, or is this something that really reflects his personality and what he's all about? I don't know. If you have some ideas about that, like feel free to drop those in the comments because I'm kind of interested in how his like musical self is portrayed in the movie and like what that should be. So that's all my thoughts about this piece. We made it to the end. I will kind of do some compare and contrast now. Like, I feel like there are some things that really show Lin-Manuel Miranda's style in this movie. Over the course of the whole soundtrack, you can kind of pick these things out and go, oh, yeah, I see, like, this kind of reminds me of this from Hamilton or that from In the Heights or, something like that. So I want to do a little bit of that. I want to also compare this to some other Disney films that have been made with like a strong musical element. So, like, how does this compare to something like The Little Mermaid or Aladdin or, something like that? I think that'd be a lot of fun. Thank you all for watching. If you haven't seen the other videos, go ahead and check them out. They're all under my lyric analysis playlist on YouTube. And if you have some time, I'd appreciate if you check out my Patreon. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your support. And I will see you next time.